It's finally happened. Genesis are on tour again. So if you've watched the channel in the past, you will know that I am a Genesis fan. I have been a Genesis fan since 1982, when I was the grand old age of 11, and I was introduced to Genesis by my German pen pal's older brother. I think his name was Jürgen, and he was into prog rock and general rock. He introduced me to Boston, he introduced me to Toto, he introduced me to Chicago, and Yes, and Emerson Lake and Palmer, and I've probably got him to thank for a lot of my musical taste in terms of that sort of arena. Anyway, he introduced me to Genesis. He played me the Then There Were Three album, which came out in 1978. So this was only 3 years prior to me being in Germany, 4 years prior to me being in Germany in 1982. And he played me this album, and I had my Walkman, and he made a tape of this album, and when I came home I bought the album, which was a 12-inch platter. It was a double album case, but it was a 12-inch platter. No CDs at that point in time. They hadn't been invented. It was 5 years pre-CD. So there we are. That was me being introduced to Genesis.
Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon.
Now, over the years, I've been to see Genesis 4 times. I wish I'd been to see them more times, but obviously during the 80s and 90s their touring wasn't as much, and I wasn't old enough to go to gigs on my own. So my first gig I went with one of my parents, and the second gig I went with a friend of mine, and the third gig I went with friends of mine, and the fourth gig I went to see them in Paris the last time out. I didn't see them in London, I saw them in Paris, which was an experience for very many reasons. So this is the 5th time that I've been to see Genesis. I wasn't disappointed, but it's not what you think the concert would be. First, we have to talk about the band makeup. Yes, it is the 3 nuclei of Genesis. You have Mike Rutherford, Tony Banks and Phil Collins. But Phil Collins, I have to say, and it really pains me to say, does not look a well man. He looks quite ill. He comes onto the stage with a cane to aid his walking, and he sings the entire set sat down at the front of the stage. That being said, he doesn't make a bloody bad job of it. The rest of the band are made up of 2 backing singers whose names I can't remember, Daryl Sturmer, who is the stalwart guitarist that has been in the Phil Collins band and the Genesis touring band for many, many years, and the new addition, who is Nick Collins, who is Phil's son, is playing drums because the stalwart Phil Collins band member and Genesis touring band member Chester Thompson retired about 10 years ago. So Nick has stepped into that role, and he does a very, very good job, I might add. You will not be disappointed with Nick's drumming. If you like Phil Collins drumming, Nick has adopted that style. It is really, really good and tight. Now, I flew up to see Genesis in Scotland at the SSE Hydro. Yes, I live right down on the south coast of England, and I went more or less to the north end of England to see them. Why was that? Well, it's a very long story, but the bottom line is, when we bought the tickets, or when I bought the tickets, I was working in Scotland a lot, and I was due to be in Scotland on the dates that we were going to, I was going to see them at the Hydro. So when the pandemic came along and the shows were rescheduled and the shows were rescheduled again, I had no option. I had to go to the Hydro. So I flew up on Wednesday with Em, who's one of the housemates here, to see them. Then worked out of the Scottish offices of the company I work for on Thursday, and then went to the Hydro Thursday evening to see the band that I've been looking forward to seeing for the last 14 years. Yes, it has been 14 years since they toured in 2007, and that's really quite hard to comprehend. And it's a shame that it's taken them 14 years, and where Phil is in terms of his health, to get to this point of touring again. One of those years, or let's say nearly 2 years, has been because of the pandemic. But reading through literature and news articles, this reunion really stems from the fact that Mike and his other band, Mike and the Mechanics, supported Phil Collins on part of the European tour that he did. Was it the one I'm sorry, I'm not dead yet? Now, I couldn't get tickets for that for various reasons. I wasn't in the right places at the right points in time to be able to get tickets to see him at the O2 and wherever else he played in the UK and Europe. So I was a bit miffed about that. But Mike was supporting Phil, and he came on stage and jammed with Phil and did a couple of songs, various songs in Phil's set. And after that, that kind of was the springboard for this Genesis reunion tour. And they all got together and, as they put it in the press, had a cup of tea, which is what us English do very well, having cups of tea. And that's effectively springboard the events that see them on stage last Thursday. Of course, once you decide you're going to do a tour, then lots of things have to sort of kind of fall into place. You need to know what you're going to sing, what your audio and visual is going to look like, and more importantly, where you're going to play. So, after being wined and dined by Genesis, yes, we were taken into the arena, and we were seated 3 rows from the stage, right in front of Tony Banks's rig. Look up there. And then they came on, and they didn't come on like some bands do with an intro. They basically walked onto the stage. Phil sat down, and then they started. And the first song out of the gate, Duke's intro. The stall what they've started the concert with for the last couple of times I've seen them, they've started it with this. And it's really fitting because it basically brings you into the Genesis arena, what Genesis is all about, that Genesis sound. And then they went straight into Turn It On Again. And I have to be honest to say, I can't tell you how much I was singing. In fact, I think it's probably one of the reasons why I've been so ill over the last few days, because of the fact that I was singing so much and I had so much to drink. Yes, I was quite well merry by the time I actually got into the concert venue. I wasn't drunk, I was just very, very, very well merry. And then you get into you start singing away and you're singing all the hits that you know. And that's probably why my voice went, and then I've gone down with a cold, and I've been particularly ill for the last 3 or 4 days. But it was fab. And I'll come on to why it was fab in a sec. So let me first say, if you haven't seen Genesis on this tour, and I know that the tour has been postponed because of a COVID outbreak within the band, which is such a shame. And we were very lucky that we saw them on the Thursday night because they cancelled the Friday night at the Hydro. So that was a really, really, really lucky point for us. But if you haven't seen them, I can tell you that you're in for a great experience. And unfortunately, there's a couple of idiots, and I do say that meaningfully because I don't think people should be videoing the whole concert. You don't get... I put snippets of a concert up on side panels when I'm talking about me going to concerts. I don't video the whole concert. It really is a kind of aid memoir to me and it adds to my memories. But there are people out there that video the entire concert. And then I saw it the other day on YouTube. Somebody had put the whole concert, whole 2.5 hours of concert on YouTube. Now, to be honest, somebody needs to go and report that because I think that is wrong. I do think that is wrong. Yes, you put bits of it up, but you don't put the whole thing up. That's just wrong to me. I'm sorry. There's lots of things like IP and what have you, and I wrestle with that quite a lot when I put snippets of bands up because of the YouTube hits and what have you. But reality is that shouldn't happen unless the band have authorised it. Anyway, we come to the point where they're on stage for 2.5 hours. They started at 8:10. They finished at 10 to 11. Okay, and you've got to bear in mind there was the encore bit that goes on between. So it was 2.5 hours pretty much. They started, as I say, with Duke's End, went into Turn It On Again. Everybody is singing away. And what Genesis didn't do is they didn't take an interlude. Right, a lot of bands will play for an hour, stop, and then come on and play for another hour. So you get 2 hours, but most of the good bands will play for 2 hours. Some of the bands that don't really have much material, they run out of steam after about 45 minutes and then start arsing around. But most of the bands, the legendary bands that you and I would know as the bands to go and see, the super groups as they used to be called, have enough material to last 2 hours easily. But they normally do this sort of hour format. Genesis didn't do that. Genesis started, went through and finished. The thing about the Genesis sound is it's so distinctive. It's a sound that's been developed over the years. It's morphed. That very early sound of sort of Hammond organs and mellotrons has moved into the sort of a very polished guitar synth with a very, very strong percussion suite behind it, which you'd expect from the three principal members, and that's their craft. Turn It On Again morphed into Mama, and he does the sort of typical Mama thing where he sings into a red light so that when that's projected onto the screen he looks very ghostly white. Unfortunately, it just accentuates the fact that Phil doesn't look well, but the singing is almost there. I wouldn't say Phil's voice is the same as it was 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago when I saw him in 2007. His voice isn't there. It has suffered, but he can still sing. So don't get me wrong. It's not as if he can't sing. He can still sing, but his voice is obviously suffering from his illness, and he must be a man in incredible pain. That's all I can say. Now, this is a blog about keyboards and electronic music creation instruments, so I should really talk about Tony's rig. And Tony actually has a very simple rig in terms of the actual keyboards on the stage. There are only 3 of them. There is a Korg Oasis, and it's not the 88 key version that he toured with in 2007. It's a 61. I'm assuming it's a 61 given the size of the unit. It looks like a 61 note keyboard that he's using. Now, apparently that is the only keyboard on stage that is actually generating sound. Okay, the other 2 keyboards that he's got, which he plays most of the time and he's facing Phil, the top one I'm pretty sure is a Korg Wave Station. The bottom one, I can't tell you what it is because I've never seen a direct photograph of it, and I couldn't see from the angle of where I was what it was from the auditorium. I did go and try and have a look at it after the gig had finished, but the way the cables and what have you were lying, it was very difficult to work out what sort of keyboard it was. If it actually was a keyboard and not just a MIDI controller, it could just be a MIDI controller. It wasn't that. I'm looking at the photograph on the screen over here, and it wasn't that deep, so it could purely have just been a MIDI controller. And apparently most of the sounds that Tony was generating for the concert are being generated inside main stage, which is running on a MacBook that's sitting inside the tower of equipment sitting behind him. So he actually operates a very, very simple rig. What is really interesting about it though is that he is operating a Korg Oasis, which is, we all know 2007-ish, a Korg Wave Station, which is mid-90s, and at one point they do an intimate section where they wheel on a Roland A80 MIDI controller for Tony to play, which I suspect is MIDI'd up to the rig that sits behind him in his little stage area. But he's still playing a Roland A80. It's really interesting. No modern keyboards are being used on this particular rig, and I just find that I find it inspiring from the point of view that it's legacy tech, and it just proves that it can actually withstand years of use. So from that point of view, I'm quite inspired. But I just find it very interesting that none of the manufacturers, Korg or Roland, Tony's never really been into Yamaha. Well, I've never seen him play Yamaha kit. I've seen him play Roland and Korg equipment all the time, but Yamaha kit seems to be slightly aloof for him. So neither of those manufacturers managed to get a stage piano or a I don't know, a MIDI controller onto the stage for him. Very interesting that. Anyway, but that's what the rig looked like. Now, as I said, they played a whole raft of tunes that you would expect them to play from the hit albums from '78. I don't think they went. That's not true. They did. I was going to say that. I don't think they went below '78, but they did. But they played out things from, and then there were three: Duke, Adacab, Genesis, Land of Confusion, Invisible Touch, and We Can't Dance. So they played songs, the ones you'd expect from all three of those albums. Right, you won't be disappointed if you went to hear that stuff. You would have heard pretty much most of the stuff. One of the things I will say is watch the visuals. If you see the concert, watch the visuals when they do Land of Confusion, because they reorientate it so that you can see the whole sort of pandemic thing coming through. It's very, very funny, I have to be honest. In terms of the visuals of the concert, what I will say is that they've taken the approach that less is better. And what do I mean by that? Yes, there are lots of lights above them, as you'd expect from any sort of concert like this, but they're very simplistically used, okay, in terms of how they could be used. And the video wall that sits behind them, the band have consciously said they don't want videos of them while they're playing up on this screen all the time. They want the visuals to work with what's being played. So when they come on and start playing Home by the Sea, right, you get these very sort of visual occult type images on the screen, which really match into where the song is going at any point in time. As I said, Land of Confusion, they reorientated the video there. It's very Pink Floydy. Okay, that piece of video that they do for that, very Pink Floydy. So if you remember the Pink Floyd videos for A Brick in the Wall, very akin to that type of style, I would say. The other one that really got me in terms of visuals was the video they did, and I think it was for Tonight Tonight. And what they did was they split the video wall in, and effectively it looked like it was the spines of an old cassette tape. So those of you old enough to remember what a cassette tape looked like, I haven't got any round here. I've had them here for. Well, let's use a CD case. So there's a CD case. So this spine here. So a cassette tape was wider and slightly shorter, but they brought these like spines down the screen next to each other, and then they filled them up with the original spine label that would have been on the cassette. And you knew it was a cassette label because when you were looking at it, it said chrome. And for those that have never used cassettes, you know, chrome tapes were the best. But they used to bring down they brought down these labels, and then they started bringing down images of the band over the years. And that wasn't just the sort of core nuclei of Genesis as we know them now, but that was Anthony Phillips, it was Peter Gabriel, it was Chester Thompson, it was various other members of the band, and in different time zones. So, pictures of them on stage and singing in, the 70s when Gabriel was the front man, pictures of them touring in the 80s, pictures of them with the sort of macho man chests and open shirts and the whole sort of Miami Vice thing going on. But they showed all these pictures over the years intertwined with these cassette spines, and then they moved from cassette spines to video spines. So I don't know whether you remember, with the videotape, you used to write on the videotape what the thing was, normally in felt tip pen, so you didn't lose it. And they did the same thing, and then they did like the mastering tapes. So if any of you worked in studios, which majority of people hopefully watching this have done some sort of, or been in some sort of studio, the old, well, I suppose you sort of started with sort of 1/4 inch and went up to sort of 2-inch tape, depending on how many heads you were running on your recording equipment. But those old mastering tapes and the boxes and stuff that went like that, it was so well done. It really was so well done. And I sort of looked at that and thought, that was actually a masterpiece in the band's history. One song all brought together, in the space of about 3.5 minutes. And I just thought that was, I thought that was so well done. It really resonated with me, because obviously, in 1982, when I was first introduced to Genesis, I was 11. I'm now in my 50s, just. And you can see how the band has evolved over all those years, and included in that are the spitting image puppets as well. By the way, they make an appearance in this particular sequence, and I thought it was so well done. Midway through the concert, like a lot of bands do now, they try to do some sort of acoustic set. This really wasn't, I don't think, the acoustic set. I would say it's probably more of an intimate set. And they did 3 songs during this period. They did That's All, which really quite suits that sort of arrangement. During that arrangement, they all swap sides. So when you go and see Genesis, you always see Mike to the left of Phil and Tony to the right of Phil, and then Chester normally is behind Phil, or would have been behind Phil to the left. And that's kind of the setup they've kind of continued with, apart from Nick is now behind Phil to the right slightly. Now what they've now done is, when they went through this acoustic or intimate set, is that Tony comes over and sits on the right, Mike comes over and sits on the left, and Daryl, who is normally on the far left, now comes over and sits on the far right, on the right next to Mike. So they're playing effectively in a semicircle around where Phil is, and they bring in a very simplified bass drum, snare and hi-hat that Nick can play, and he sits just behind his dad at that point. And it's very well done. I say they play That's All, which suits that kind of setup quite well. Then they did The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, and then they finished this particular piece with probably one of my favourite Genesis hits. Not Genesis songs, but Genesis hits, which is Follow You, Follow Me. I have to be honest and say my favourite Genesis song is actually on the There Are 3 album. They very rare. It's never been played live as far as I'm aware. So that's this kind of intimate set, and it really is well done. And it kind of plays to the fact that Phil's static and not able to move around, so they sort of bring the band in close. And as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, they did do an encore. They did two tracks in the encore. One track I was kind of expecting, because it hadn't been played and it was one of the big hits. So I was kind of expecting that as part of the encore. But the second song they played as part of the encore, I was not expecting at all. It was a Gabriel era song. I think it comes off Nursery Crime, and I haven't looked that up, and I should have looked that up before I went to camera. It's a song it kind of resonates quite well, but it really incorporates the fact that Genesis have had this massive career over all those years, and it was a song I wasn't expecting. I'm not going to tell you what it is, You know, you'll see it if you go and watch the videos on the internet and stuff like that, so you'll see it. But it was something I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting a song from that era. I've always kind of hoped that they might put more songs in from the Then There Were Three album, but I'm probably Then There Were Three is always special to me because that was the first album I listened to of Genesis. It's the one album that really turned me on to their music. Not the other albums aren't good, but it's that the Then There Were Three album for me is the best album, for very many reasons. So what can I say? What can I say indeed? The tour manager, while having dinner, said that, you know, they wanted to continue to do this. Phil made some comments about putting this thing to bed. Mike made some comments about this will only go to bed when one of them starts pushing up daisies. I have to be honest and say I don't think Genesis will tour again. I don't think Phil is well enough to tour again. That's my personal honest opinion, unless something changes to his health. I don't think they're going to tour again. What I'd really like to see is I'd like to see Genesis reform at Fisher Farm, which is not too many miles away from where I am today. I've been to Fisher Farm, I know where it is, which is their studios. They still own it. It's still owned by Tony and Mike. It's still used for various pieces. I don't think it's used that much nowadays because I don't think Mike's recording, I don't think Tony's recording, and Phil definitely hasn't been recording. They have had other artists in there using it at their invitation. There was a German artist in there not long ago. He did a YouTube video about how he was absolutely stoked to be in Fisher Farm. I'd like to see them reform at Fisher Farm. I'd like to see them put more music down, write more music as a band, and put that down, and then potentially re-release it over coming years. I don't think they should look at it as going to tour, because I don't think that's reality. I do think they should look to put the music down and just leave us with some more Genesis material to go forward with. These guys are in their 70s now, so let's be honest. You know, yes, there are people still touring in their 80s, but these guys are in their 70s, and 2.5 hours is a good old run. I know putting an album together can be stressful, but if you think about putting an album together where you have no stress, you own the recording studio, you own the facilities, you don't have a record company breathing down your neck to release material, then, you know, recording becomes a much simpler process. It becomes a much more organic process. It becomes a much more artistic process. You're recording what you want because you feel it's the right thing to do. So come on, guys, I'll leave you with this. Turn it on again. Live long and prosper. Bye bye.